Hey everyone, welcome back to Secret Sonics. This is episode 160 with Jonathan Friedlander. I had a great chat with John once again on the podcast. We talked about so many things, including getting credit for your work, always getting better at your craft, working fast, getting great vocal performance recordings, dealing with time management. We talk about recording and mixing drums, his approach to mixing and parallel compression, capturing live performances and dynamics, monitoring, benefits of interning at the beginning of your career, the woes of social media, and everything in between. This was really a great chat. I think you're going to love it too. So with all that to say, here's my conversation with Jonathan Friedlander coming up right here on Secret Sonics. Hey everyone. If you're anything like me, you often find yourself looking for business insight in podcasts. And I'm sure many of you are also into meditation and reflection to help better understand yourself. Former guest of the show, Carl Bonner, decided to launch a podcast that brings these two elements together. It's a series of guided self-reflection exercises, but specifically for freelance creatives like you and me, focusing on the struggles we face as we try to grow our businesses, while also finding more happiness in the work that we do. It's called Thanks for Thinking. It's definitely an unusual format, but if you want to grow your self-awareness, find deeper career satisfaction, and make more money, then I think this podcast might be for you. Experience it for yourself and click the link in the show notes below. You're listening to Secret Sonics, a podcast exploring the creative side of music production. Join us weekly for honest conversations with real-world music producers and audio professionals. Hello, and welcome back to Secret Sonics. I am your host, Ben Wallach. My guest today is Jonathan Friedlander. John is a Jerusalem-based music producer, audio and mixing engineer who first appeared on the podcast 3 years ago. I just looked it up. It was episode 9, and it was September of 2019. So not only was that 3 years ago, that was like a lifetime ago, basically. And I thought it was about time to bring him back on the show, catch up. You know, we're friends and feel like we're kind of like colleagues because we're both working in the Jerusalem scene and send each other business. And anyways, he's a great hang and a great guy. So welcome back to the show.
Thank you for having me back. Glad to be back. It's an honor, and I'm very happy to see how far the show has come in the last 3 years. The grassroots to, really, really getting a following and putting out really good content in an era where there's a lot of crappy content available on YouTube and Instagram. A lot of people giving garbage advice, and you get here, straight to the source of it, It's great.
I try. Thank you, man. I mean, thank you for being a part of the grassroots campaign, like just the very beginning. Like, I just started the podcast interviewing people I knew, and then it kind of spiderwebbed. So thanks for being part of the source or the beginning of it. Yeah, so let's bring like the audience up to date. What are you up to these days? How are things going? Like, you have like similar to me, but maybe a bit more than me. You have like a small studio in the heart of town in Jerusalem. Like you have a live room, which I don't have. Tell us a little bit about what you're up to these days.
Yeah, so I have a small live room to keep it humble. Really, since last time we sat together was before Corona, and once Corona really picked up, it was a big question of, do we have people in the studio initially? And there's just a lot of unknowns. So I always, when I see things shift in the world and things get funky, I kind of think, okay, well, how do I shift my strategy and my plan? So in my studio, I set up, cameras and a screen so that clients and artists can book the space and come in and actually Zoom with other producers around the world and really be able to see them in the live room with the screen in front, and the producers overseas sees the artist in the room, and they're able to start producing and writing, and they could right there on the spot whip out vocal tracks or whatever they want to lay down and shoot it over to the producer. And we're in separate rooms, so you're less of a fear of Corona and all of that stuff. So I was able to actually keep operating in that sort of capacity at the beginning. And at the same time, now that everything's kind of going back to normal, I'd still do some live sound work here and there, and whether it's just running in front of house or through my own rig that I rent out to certain events. As well as I have clients that reach out to me from my personal production touch, as well as mixing. And then just having the studio facility, it's a constant stream of random people calling me for, I need a few hours to record something. And I don't necessarily know what I'm getting in for each time. But that's that's also exciting. I miss that about where I used to work in America, was being able to have, constant, shift of I'm recording. I guess I'm recording, Frank Sinatra covers today, and tomorrow I'm recording some trap songs, and the next day I'm recording some operatic Hasidic music. It's always very different.
Yeah, you work on some like really out there modern like Hasidic music. Like it's pretty wild. And yeah, the productions sound amazing, by the way. Like the mixes sounding huge. So it's like so funny for me to kind of hear like that kind of like modern low end and modern production over like such like old school Jewish words.
Yeah, I appreciate
you're doing a lot of that stuff. Yeah, it's really neat. Yeah, I guess like let's talk about how the people find you for the production work. Like how has work been coming your way?
It's mostly, I guess, word of mouth. I do one song with one person, and then a lot of people that are into him or friends with him or just general fans. For example, Yair Elitzor, an Israeli religious artist who does rap, pop, kind of modern thing. I started working with him a year and a half ago, and right after the first song, he started to get a boost in following, and he started to become hooked on, coming back to me for more productions. I think we did 5 tracks altogether over the last year and a half, and his following has grown significantly, and I could just see by the type of people that call and what they say, when they want to start something like, wow, they heard what I did for Elitzor. They want something similar because people in their world of religious music know religious music. That's what they grew up listening to and what they hear. And there are exceptions. We know between me and you, we know other producers in the religious world that are doing phenomenal things also. But as a general, broad term, it's not a lot of, trying to break new boundaries like you'd see in the modern pop world. Let's make a new sound. Mm-hmm. So with every artist, every different client that comes in with me, I want to make my print, even if I don't necessarily connect to the song as much as I'd like. You don't always have the luxury of working with only who you want to work with and what you want to work with. But I always try to implant in it something I'm proud of and something that connects it to me, and so that I can listen back to it and say like, yeah, that's, we did something different there. We did something cool and fresh. And even sometimes it doesn't work out like that, and you think you made like less of a impactful song. For example, with Yair Elitzor, our second song we did became a song I didn't necessarily enjoy, and I thought felt a little bit predictable or whatever. It just wasn't something that I still put my stamp on, and I still feel like I did good work. But as just a general song, I wasn't such a fan of it. But it blew up, and it has over 1 million plays on YouTube, and I had no idea, finishing it up thinking like, wow, thank God that's done, to suddenly it's so huge that I have other clients coming in based on that production and hearing that, and even just, for the first time, I've worked on stuff, that's mixed and I've recorded and mixed on some stuff that, people would recognize and mention, but now to have something that I produced and be in strange conversations with a very religious family, and they hear about that song and they're like, oh my gosh, you did that? And it's like, wow, I had no idea that one thing would have such a far reach.
Yeah, it's great. And I also, like, when I went to see like the YouTube video, like it was so nice to see your credit there, like right at the top, like for anybody to find. Like that's really nice of the artist. Like I feel like in an era where credits are like shit, to be honest, like it was nice to see them kind of credit you on the big YouTube video, and just like, I'm sure that's a big part of how people found you.
Yeah, I'm grateful for that. And really, I'm also grateful for my brother back in the day when I was first going off freelance. He told me, get everybody to put your name in the YouTube thing. Get everybody to put your website, because your search engine optimization will get better. And the more people Google your name, there's some other Jonathan Friedlanders out there. And I think like 10 years ago, I was like, I'm going to try to make myself come up on Google before all those other Jonathan Friedlanders. So with a lot of things, I try to ask the client, too, if you don't mind, if there's not like huge pressures from labels or other people on how it's presented, if you don't mind adding the name in there, that would mean the world. That's
great.
Yeah.
It's so smart. I feel like it actually, like, I don't know, my buddy Travis, who has a podcast called Progressions, who, he's talking a lot about credits these days, and it's not something that I don't know, like it's not something that I've pushed so much, but it's really like, it's really important, and it's crazy that we don't push it. Like we should, like you said, like even just asking nicely, like the way you're saying, like photographers, like if you don't credit a photographer on a photo that you put on Instagram, like they'll like harass you, like, put the credit. Like our industry, like the audio industry, is not taking that seriously, and it bugs me to no end that there'll be these like YouTube videos, and like literally every person who's involved in the YouTube video production gets credited, but the actual sound, it's like a music video. Nothing about the music gets credited. It's actually
Yeah.
it's crazy. It's bonkers. Like, shouldn't that be the thing that's
I think that there's a divide in how people, how something behind the scenes, and when the song goes from the artist and the development people involved in the production pass off the file to whoever does the marketing and the promotion, and whoever actually loads it up and registers it with all the different places that needs to be done. They don't necessarily know at all who went into it and what happened with it. I personally, before leaving America, I had recorded on a Rick Ross album on Maybach Music 4, recorded with my friend Daniel Watson. Together we did the session for recording the drums and the live horn section. And that album wound up going gold, and I wanted to be sure that my credit was, intact. And right when the album actually came out, the producers of the project, Justice League, they called me and, super apologetic, saying, how something happened with the label. They printed the first 100,000 copies without my name in the credits, because Justice League had submitted the credits but didn't get to them, I guess, in time before the first 100,000 prints, and the label just went off with it. So they were super nice and super apologetic, and as soon as copies with my name did get printed, I was already in Israel by then, they sent me a copy so that I could see it and be proud of it. I was young at the time. I think I was 21 when I recorded on that, when we did the recording.
Wow.
And that was a big part of, my development and learning where I was at the time and the people I was with. And I think that was, the producers did exactly the right thing. And somewhere on the other end, I think it just happens all the time with lots of places. I have a lot more credits than what I could find on the internet from a lot of things. But at the same time, it's very difficult to find a way to go back on it. And I think that, somebody like Miguel Scott, I think he's very good at, keeping track of all that. And I think he might have found
I think you first introduced me to him, or maybe you introduced me to somebody else who introduced me to him, and then he was on the show back, I think, in one of the episodes 70s-ish. I'll have to go back and look that up and put it in the show notes, but he's excellent.
So Miguel, I credit him also. Like, I've learned a lot from him. Mm-hmm. And he's somebody, like, if you look at, he's always learning new techniques and developing a skill. You think, like, 10 years ago that I thought the dude knew everything. And, 10 years later, and he knows even more. And he's still learning and he's still trying new things. And I respect that so much because, especially when you get into the hustle, it's very hard to keep developing your skills when you're just trying to pay the bills and service the clients that you got going on.
Oh, yeah.
Like, to spend time on development for yourself.
Yeah, but I think also just doing the work is development. Like, I don't know, like, it was for me, like, we're friends and we're in touch and whatever, but like, you sent me a bunch of links of stuff you'd worked on recently, and I was like, oh, wow, look at what you've been, like, grinding, like, that was my, like, reaction. I was like, oh, you're just, like, you're putting in the work, you're just doing these, like, records, and they sound huge, and it's amazing. I was like, oh, cool, like, it has been a while, like, look what he's doing, like, this is crazy, like, it's just doing the work,
Yeah, I appreciate that.
I love, what I love about other people that do what we do is just everyone that's doing what we're doing is just trying to get better over time. And like, the pursuit of getting better doesn't end. It's not like a field where it's like, okay, I know everything there is to know about welding, just through welding people under the bus. But you know what I'm saying? Like, we're just always trying to improve.
Yeah, 100%.
I think it's because it's a combination of science and art. It's like this, like, interesting. It's also what makes it so difficult is like, there's the technical things that can be right or not, like, better or not better, but there's also like the art, which is so subjective and might be better or not be better. And
exactly.
I don't know,
everybody interprets things how they interpret it. You could really spend a lot of time listening to one thing and thinking like it's the biggest crucial detail, like how I pronounced the tail of that word that I sang, and is it perfect, is it not, is it the right, and you listen to it a million times, like literally a million times, and then you say like, cool, I think it's good. But nobody else is ever going to listen to it a million times. So like, really, like, if you listen to something once or twice, like, without being too emotionally attached to it, I guess, I don't know what to say, like, too over OCD about it. But one or two times you hear something, you should know right away if something's wrong or right. And if you really have to listen to it 5 times, then chances are most people didn't jump out to them right away.
Right.
In the grand scheme of things.
That's it. That's an interesting point. Is that kind of how you're approaching mixing these days, of just like gut reactions, just taking things how you hear it?
I have a workflow and like a process of how I go through, but sometimes you get things that are different genre and a different like layout, or sometimes like things are very live and some things are very processed and they require more attention or less attention. It can be very daunting. Sometimes, like, I got a mix a few weeks ago that was like 85, 90 tracks, a lot of strings, a lot of like live orchestral stuff. And it was really, really nice piece of music, but it was like very daunting to dig into. So I'm not second guessing myself hardly at all through the process unless I'm trying something, maybe a little bit different, like A-Bing. I go right in, I do my EQ, I find what I want to cut, I do the cut. I don't spend 15 minutes taking the cut off and putting the cut back on, taking the cut off and putting the cut back on, because I won't make half the amount of distance that I can make in a short amount of time if I'm always second guessing myself, rather to trust my ears, trust my monitors, trust what I've been doing. And then, once you get down the line and you've done the bulk of the work, then you could really go and A/B something. Let me take off the vocal chain and see what it was like before. Let me put together. Like sometimes I'll do a mix, and then after 6 hours of sitting on something, you kind of become less impartial to it. So you turn it off for a few hours. You go home, you listen to it in the car, and you'll notice, okay, the bass line, because bass is a difficult thing. A lot of people have taming it, and there's no you just do this or just do that, because every bass is different. And when I get back to the studio the next day, then I'll pull it up and turn off plugins in the vote bass chain. Then I'll start to go and see where I went wrong or where I could do better. But in the moment of it, it's just like how they used to do in the old days. I feel like to tape, when you got a room for 12 hours to do your mix, to tape, and you got to come out of it and be really happy with it. You do your recalls. You might have the next day. Also, you might not. You're not necessarily going through that 12 hours second guessing your whole self. You're laying it out on the console and doing what you need to do. And hopefully you know what you're doing, and you know what the room sounds like and what you're doing, and things come out good.
Yeah. Yeah, it's interesting. I spoke with John Greenham, who mastered the big Billie Eilish record, and he was telling me anybody could master if they had enough time to do it. But the reason why the big mastering engineers are doing what they're doing is because they have to do it in 2 seconds, and they just do a good job. And there's no time to overthink it. You just do the master, and then you're done. That's it.
That's my problem.
You don't have time to go back and just second guess yourself, like you said. What were we going to say? I'm sorry, I cut you off.
No. I have that problem with mastering. By the time I get to it, I don't know what I'm hearing. I have a master chain that's for getting my mixes up to a nice loud level and to make it feel mastered. But when somebody asks me to do a master, it's kind of I could sit here and look at your stereo track, and I could do something to it, but I don't know if I'm helping or hurting. It's another world. Yeah,
I think what's interesting about the difference between mixing and mastering is that when you're mixing, you're really focused on the individual trees, and then mastering, you shouldn't be focused on more than the forest. Mm-hmm. And when I mix a song and then I try to master the song, when I'm in the mastering process, I'm thinking too much about the individual instruments and how the moves I'm doing are affecting it. If I'm boosting the low end, is it I'm listening to the kick drum in relation to the vocal, and that's not applicable anymore. Now it's just about energy and how much low end versus how much it's not it's the wrong approach for I'm thinking about mastering in the mixing in a mixer's mindset, and that's why I can't master my own mixes.
Mm-hmm. I think a lot of people are working like that now.
Yeah, both.
Yeah, I think a lot of people are mixing with the master chain on, and a lot of times that might be the same product that's handed off at the end of the day, unless it's a label asking that it gets mastered by someone specifically.
What's your approach to that? Are you taking the mastering chain off when you send it out?
Yeah, I'm personally, most of my stuff I'm sending to Miguel Scott to master, and if the client doesn't have a budget for mastering, then it usually will roll with my master that I did in the mix, which is fine. It's loud enough, and it's cool. Miguel just does a better job than me, hands down, and I appreciate having a second set of ears to be able to double check that I'm not too harsh or not too fat or anything like that on the low end.
Yeah, you need that communication. I feel I wouldn't say that we're just starting out, but having that communication with a mastering engineer enables us to just have more confidence of putting out our product. You know what I mean? And
mm-hmm.
that QA, and even having the mastering engineer kind of give you some feedback even before you send the final mix.
Yeah,
kind of back and forth really helps to make a better product.
For sure.
It's interesting, when you were talking about your first impressions, I was thinking about college and how I really need to do more of this in audio, because in college I kind of figured out how to do really well on multiple choice tests, A, B, C, or D. And I realized that every time I went with my gut, I got it right. If I ever thought about the question too much, I would get it wrong. And so by the end of college, I was just acing all my tests because I always just went by the gut. Whatever my gut told me, I just would go with my gut, and it was always right. And as soon as you start to read the question too closely, then they're trying to throw you off with some wording or whatever, and that's when you would get it wrong. I need to, with audio, trust myself more and leave less room for, I don't know, like I feel like we record with like a safety net on often, like to like make sure like, okay, like this is probably good, but just in case, let's make sure that we record it like this and we don't like, we don't overcommit ourselves in a recording, and like it's the wrong approach, I think, and need to like untether ourselves. I don't know. Anyways.
Yeah. I think it could relate to a lot of things in general. Like you asked me to send you some stuff last night. It was like a task for me to like track back, like what have I been working on? I don't even remember what feels right, what's good. And I was preparing a list to send over to you. And at some point in time, I was like, well, do I? No. I was like, all right, this is it. No second guessing, hit send. Like the moment I went and hit send on the email, it was, you have to trust yourself at the end of the day. And if you don't trust yourself, then it's a Zen thing. You got to like really tie into it. And I think that it helps when you work in live sound also, where like you've got this amount of time to get it done, and then it happens, it's either good or it's bad. There's no coming back to it. Like, and you start to be more decisive with your actions. And like, when I say live sound, sometimes, in that world, you've got very strange setups where you have to run cables in the air, and really, I've been in some weird places. And when you're doing something there and you have a tight timeline, you have to worry about safety, whatever. You do something and you just know to do it right all the way through and not second guess the whole time you're in the process. Because otherwise you just don't get anywhere done, and sometimes the work gets sloppy that way. So you could translate over to everything in life. When you're driving and you change lanes, or when you make a decision, you make decisions all day, very fast. Interesting little side note. Apparently, my wife's very into anthropology and sociology and things like that. And supermarkets are like set up in a way that's, makes you optimize your buying, but they put the candies at the end because apparently a human can only make a certain amount of decisions not can only make, but they optimized a certain amount of decisions.
There's decision fatigue is what it's called.
Exactly. And you start to crave sugar or sweet things after you've made a bunch of decisions. So that's why they put them by the cash register. So that when you're at the end and you're about to check out, you made all your decisions, like, do I get this cheese or that cheese? And you pick up a Snickers to make your brain feel better.
And even if you're aware that it's a thing, you still pick up the Snickers.
Exactly.
Because you can't hold back on the Snickers.
Yeah, so mixing, you just got to make decisions. And if you're not sure of yourself, that's cool to second guess. But if you're even producing and recording, if you're spending the whole time trying to cover your butt.
Yeah, you're not going to make good decisions. Hey everyone, it's 2022. If you still don't have a website for your studio, it's time to change that. Every single month, there are potential clients out there Googling your name, trying to find your portfolio, and deciding if you're the right choice for their music. If they can't find your portfolio, you miss out on the gig. The fastest way to get your first website up and running is by using EasyFunnels, the #1 website builder for recording studios. Their templates are all made for the audio industry, so you can just load one of their pre-built designs, upload your portfolio, add your photos, and replace the text on the pages. You could probably have your website done in the time it takes you to listen to one episode of Secret Sonics. If you're finally trying to create your website ASAP, you can get 50% off your first 3 months of EasyFunnels by going to easyfunnels.io/secretsonics, and there's a link in the show notes below, so go check it out. All right, back to the episode.
But at the same time, I did that production for this guy, Aviad Djorf, recently, and we did some live drumming, and we had like a really basic scratch track of an acoustic guitar that I played. Like he wrote the song on his acoustic guitar, but I replayed it on the tempo. We had the drummer in there playing, and there's certain things that it's hard to fully see how the whole image is going to put together before there's really all the final electric guitars and synths and stuff. So like, how does the ending happen with cymbals, without cymbals? Is there a kick there? Is there not? So for some things like that, I totally will go and be like, okay, do the ending again, but don't hit the cymbal at the end. Just end it in case we do a tighter ending and the cymbal is all wrong. It's very hard to cut out of live drums a live cymbal, resonating over all the other drum parts. So for certain transitional parts or things like that, I will go for 2 versions. Like if the second verse needs a crash on the first of every 8 bars, and what if we take the crash out? We decide, the client says, that crash is really bothering me. Rather than having the recording be ruined and not be able to do ahead of time one without a crash as a backup. Right. I made the decision that I want the crash in there. I feel like that's right. And I did that for his production, and it worked out because there's a lot of shifts and edits that we wound up making. At one point in time, it was too much crashes. At the other point in time, it was not enough. And I was able to take between some of these backup takes the pieces that I needed to make it crash exactly where we wanted. Like one on the first bar, after 4 bars, the next one, then every 2 bars, progressing with the song. So that's, just from experience and knowing, you got to run into these problems like I have run into that in the past many years ago.
Yeah.
So I know to pay attention to it.
Yeah. I think with tracking, it's always good to obviously you don't want to burn the artist out, but especially with like drummers and backing tracks and stuff like that, you have to just really be laser focused on what might happen. And so you just get extra tracks and you get extra recordings. And the most recent drum recording session I did, which was not even so recent at this point, but I just felt like everyone was ready to move on. And I said you know what, there was something about that chorus where the kick just didn't feel like it was consistent enough. Let's just do one more take. And just to clue the drummer in, hey, you did a good job, but the kick pattern wasn't consistent enough. Let's just go through it one more time, this last chorus, and then nailed it. And then it's okay, cool. I'm glad I paid attention and had that extra. For me, I'm just all in. I'm hyper focused, and I focus on. I can't focus on anything else.
That's the only way to do it. That's how you know you're a good recording engineer. Anybody can hit record and tell the artist to do whatever he wants. And you don't have to necessarily tell the artist what to do, but you have to be able to pay attention. That was a good take. Mark it, put it aside, whatever you got to do. And then if you see that you have what you need to say, let's move on, because people get tired and you want to keep the vibe up of the session and the momentum going.
Yeah.
I'm sure you've seen this where some artists like to record, let me just record on the song 8 times, and then we'll go back and listen to what was the best each time. If you're a really good recording engineer, you could keep notes as what you liked or what you didn't like throughout, so you could quickly comp together something before they even get from the other room. Sometimes you already have a comp. But sometimes it's just tiresome and pushes off a lot of the labor when you do 8 takes of something, and then you have to go back and review 8 takes. So now you're doubling your session length when, this part of the song, you had it in 2 takes. This part you needed 4. This one you did in the first one. There's nothing wrong with saying, I got it right, and to commit to it. And then, like we said, where there's the exceptions of not just from a feel perspective, but, there might be that I need a little extra this, or this might bother that part down the line, then you could shift to it.
Yeah, I like to, when I'm tracking, let's say vocals or whatever, I really like to try to move according to the song. I'll just go and work on the song until we're done, just kind of chronologically. Okay, let's do maybe I'll let the artist do 1 or 2 takes full top to bottom just to get comfortable and warmed up. But then it'll be okay, let's do the first verse. And then we'll just do the verse and focus on every part of the verse. And then we'll move on to the first chorus or whatever. And so I find I use my brain. I really should maybe write things down, but in the moment, it's hard to think about writing things down. You're just kind of mentally making notes of that was good. And I kind of build the comp as I go through the song and in the tracking process. And because I the whole okay, just do another track, and then I'll check it out later. Doesn't work for me.
Yeah, no, that's no good.
And also then you don't want it's the kind of work that it becomes a bottleneck of I don't actually want to do that, because then I have to sit through all this stuff I already sat through, and it makes you feel like you're working, like you said, working twice.
Yeah.
Also work that I don't want to do. I'd like to do it when the artist is around, so that I could just get it over with, and I don't have to oh, now I have to schedule in time to do that annoying edit, which is only going to take me an hour, but I'm going to procrastinate. And
100%.
Yeah, you know how it is.
I think the artist needs to be there for that process, mostly because they need to understand also what they're asking. You wanted to go that way of going over every little thing. So you're going to sit here with me and we're going to go over every little thing. If you're doing it, if you're already listening to 8 takes, might as well do most of the work while you're doing it. Hear what you like. And like you said, whether it's in your brain or I record using, multiple tracks that I drag down to that are all bused to the same aux. The aux is my lead vocal track. I might have 4 tracks under it that I could easily drag and drop multiple things and keep them muted if I need options, or if I need to punch overlapping things, I drag them down to there so that I can immediately play back. They hear it through the mix, through my signal chain with effects and everything like that right away. So we could be punching in without the music really ever stopping. In that way, depending on how many tracks I have under there, let's say 4 for my lead vocal and my template, I could have up to 4 takes there muted on top of each other. So while a person's doing it, I could be comping and deciding on different things. In this past, we heard that take. Let's just, while we listen back, let me swap to the other take. So see if, you got to be careful with this, that you don't disturb his vibe of, if he hears back something that's crazy, then he's going to stop and you miss that recording opportunity. But I'll certainly do as much as I can while we're doing it. It definitely
That's smart.
saves time.
Logic has like a really great comping feature with the swiping to comp, but that's actually really really smart because that way you can like not mess with your comp as you're doing overdubs on top of it.
Yeah.
Like I didn't think about trying to do something like that.
So the secret
Yeah.
the secret that I learned back at Tree Sound Studios in Atlanta, watching everybody record all the rappers and the pop artists and stuff, where you need to be very fast with your vocal recording.
Yes. Oh boy.
So
yeah.
I keep a cut track that's open all the time, whether I'm listening back, whatever, in quick punch mode on Pro Tools, it's always recording. So if we're listening back to a take and they just dropped in a line or something on top of it, I could always hit record and I've captured that. So things are always moving in a creative space. But because I'm using universal audio interfaces and stuff, I'm not monitoring my cut track through Pro Tools. We're listening, they're hearing in the booth and I'm hearing here from UAD's mixer, the vocal microphone. And then in Pro Tools from the cut track, below I have an aux, and then underneath that all the tracks that are routed to the aux. So sometimes you're recording things where there's overlapping parts, where rather than have to edit the crossfade and figure out on how to do that, or suddenly pop a new track open and copy all my plugin settings and stuff over to that new track, I already have their overlapping things, so I could do doubles and stacks on the lead if I need. And underneath that, I've got the same concept for ad-libs, same concept for a guest verse, or if there's an additional vocal thing, and then I've got two large groups of the same thing for choruses. If there's huge gospel stacks, I could already have the space. They're all routed already to the plugins, and I don't have to be adding new tracks. And I could use things to each genre and each artist differently. The one artist really likes to stack his lead vocals. Like he raps his verse, and then he raps his verse again under it, and I got to blend them in. So those might live on the lead aux together. And then another artist might do a more singing thing where he sings overlapping lines that kind of overlap each other, and all that will be on the lead bus, and any harmonies and anything else will happen on my ad-libs or verse auxes that I have labeled in the session.
Yeah, it just depends on what they're going for.
Yeah. It's also just for me to be able to work fast.
Yeah, fast, right.
Yeah.
You want to get out of the artist's way. That's the important thing.
Yeah. Well, also, if you really want to like get clients and like build a name for yourself, then before you make things start sounding really good, you should be really fast. Well, you should still have things sound pretty good, but you don't need to have things sounding like a 5-star hotel. If you're fast and you're recording, and you could keep the vibe going of the session and get a decent recording that's not distorted or overcompressed, then that's all that you need. But there's a lot of people that I get files that come in recorded in America. I don't know where. Vocals are distorted. Sometimes they're like distorted without even clipping. So I don't know what happened there. And you got to wonder how do you get to that point? It's a part of it. If you don't know how to mix something, then you'd never hear it. How much when you compress something and you clean something up, how suddenly you hear all of the distortion come all the way out to the front. Before, when it's just a muddy recording, you don't hear that. But I think if you're able to just know your signal flow, hit record, and be fast with your editing and everything like that, and you're not recording in distortion, you could hand your stuff off to the biggest mix engineers in the world, labels, people, everybody would use you because you're fast. You save them money, you keep their spirits up, and the vibe is good. Fast is king.
Speed is king.
Speed, like if you're fast in a session and the music's always playing, you don't have to stop and edit in person sitting in the booth, quietly like what's going on over there. Then at the end of the session, they're like, that was awesome. Can we always work with you? Because people are so used to working with people that are slow. I don't know. But, I think in the main studio market and the everybody who's really doing this for a living, they understand that. But if you want to strive to really open new doors, the easiest way is just to be fast at what you do and still be able to deliver a good product. But if you're slow and you deliver like an amazing, beautiful masterpiece, like it's not necessarily going to bring you everybody.
Yeah. There's a lot of parallels to that as well. First of all, I was thinking about Vance Powell, who kind of told me on the show, like the reason why Jack White kept working with me is because I was fast, not because I was good, but like I was just ready to record as soon as he was ready to record, and that was it. Like once the mojo's going, like it don't stop.
Yeah.
And so it's like it's totally true. Like speed is so important. And also like with like you said, like even if you're making masterpieces but you're doing it slowly, like we just have to do a lot of work to get better at this. And like artists also need to do a lot of songs in order to get picked up or whatever. It's not about that one song. And I think we both are thinking about some artists that were way too perfectionistic, way too OCD about specific songs, and then didn't even put it out in the end. And, like, look where they are. Nothing's happening with their career. But the artists that just put out songs and are fast and just keep doing it, they start to build momentum, and they don't overthink it. They just say, hey, that's cool. That's good. Let's go.
Yeah.
It seems to be a much better recipe for success. And same with us, like with mixing and recording, just like doing reps and making it happen is so much more important than perfecting any specific thing, because eventually perfection will come with those reps, so to speak.
Sometimes I wonder if perfection is real. Does it exist? You listen to a lot of big records and you might hear imperfections. If you think like a Kanye West record, you'd expect it to be like the cleanest, most brilliant mix, and they all sound fantastic, but there's certainly some of the songs you hear and you're just like, They let that fly. I forget what song it was, but one of them has like in one of the choruses, like you could hear like a high-end sizzly, just like a ringy distortion thing from one of the samples. And it really stands out to me. I'm like, I would clean that up. But, in that sense, maybe that made the vibe of the song for him, that dirtiness and that imperfection. Imperfections, I think a lot of people will test, are the perfection, little happy mistakes or whatever. But sometimes you could play an acoustic guitar perfect without any finger noises or anything like that. But then it might sound like a MIDI, like fake.
Oh boy, I've been down
guitar.
That road. Yeah, it's true. It's sometimes the imperfections are the vibe. And also, like, I don't know, from people that I've been talking with, there's no like clean aesthetic these days. Like there's a million aesthetics, and like, the Billie Eilish record sounds completely different than the Dua Lipa records, which sound completely different than Kanye records. And like, there's different levels of pristineness and dirtiness, and it's all kind of kosher these days on the top 40. So like, it doesn't even matter. Like, what are we striving for? We're not in the Steely Dan era of like getting those perfect, 1970s like captures.
Yeah. Except with country music, where everything is perfect all the time. I think they're the Nashville style, session musicians. Like, okay, that's really perfection. But, it always depends on the genre you're talking about and this type of songwriting. And
right.
The caliber.
That's not right for everything, right?
Exactly. It's like everything has its own beauty. I guess with pop music, there's really, like, to go along with the modern attention span, which isn't very big, with our fingers swiping through things all day, and we expect results immediately, whether it's clients wanting a mix, like, I sent you that mix Friday and they messaged me Sunday, do I have it yet? Like, it's been the weekend. Like instant gratification. I've seen that, with interns too, that I've had come and be with me in the studio a little bit too. If the action isn't happening right away, their attention span goes away and then they're out the door. Like, come in to sit in on a 4-hour session, they made it an hour in before we even got to record, while the artist is still in the process of writing with the producer over Zoom. And then an hour and a half after we started, 30 minutes after the kid's gone, the artist is ready for a food run, and then we start digging into recording, and he misses the whole process and all the action. So patience is, you got to be patient. And like, I know everybody has no attention span anymore, but I think that has a lot to do with pop music, and what you hear out today also is you want to hear fresh this and then boom to that. Sometimes parts of songs don't always musically make sense, but that goes along with what people want. Okay, it's like two new songs inside of one song.
These cell phones are changing the way our brains work, and I don't know if it's possible to go back to a time where we didn't have that, because I feel like it's, once you've taken that blue pill or whatever it is, Matrix analogy, like you can't go back. Like your brain is so, once you've had a smartphone with WhatsApp and Instagram and Facebook and you're just TikTok even, like you're done.
Yeah.
Like your attention span is never going to be the same. I'm glad that we grew up in an era where that didn't exist, so we could actually learn how to focus and do that long. I mean, I'm sure some kids coming up now do have that ability, but it's crazy. We live in an ADD world,
It takes self-control and responsibility to be able to unplug yourself when you need to, and even if to unplug your kids when you need to. It's certainly can be like a weight to have the social media and the phone. It could pull you out of your focus and out of your position, but it could also be a huge asset for developing yourself. It's just a matter of your own personal responsibility to keep it under control. And for me, that's very difficult. All day my phone is like vibrating with clients asking for things, or other people who I don't necessarily know asking for questions. Can you give me advice on this, or potential bookings for other things, and to be like available all day to respond to the things. Like somebody sends like at 10 in the morning, I need a show track for something. That's great. I get to you as quick as I can. If I'm in the middle of another session with a client when that's sent, and then suddenly it's 3 p.m. and I have a second to stop to maybe eat and start doing something else, and I have to still send him the show track. And ideally for me to focus on what I'm trying to do in front of me, I would turn the phone off. But then you turn the phone back on, you find yourself like spending 3 hours of catch up. Like, okay, so this
oh
guy
my God.
this.
That's my least favorite feeling is, like I told you, like in the session, I'm so hyper focused, and nothing else in the world matters or exists even. As soon as I turn on my phone, I'm completely overwhelmed with that 2-hour WhatsApp catch up. It's like, it's insane. It's not normal. Like, we're not built to handle this.
Yeah.
So I guess I'm interested to kind of hear how you're staying organized. It sounds like your life is pretty hectic and you're holding a lot. Like, how do you keep track of everything?
We don't need to get into that because I'm not managing. We don't need to add that into this whole thing.
You're not managing.
Yeah, no, definitely not. Like, I find myself
That's
ignoring my
though.
phone and being like I'm just not able to answer you, because in the evening to be present for your family, and then
Yes.
and then to like be present for yourself when you need to be, and then to be in the creative headspace when you're doing. Sometimes the phone just can't be a part of it. And even sometimes I'll come out of a session where I'm not paying attention to my phone and things are building up, and then I might have an hour to myself. I might still not respond to the messages. Like, we don't need to add this into the podcast, but
No, this is important. I want this in the podcast if you're okay with it. Like, this is good stuff. It's important.
I mean, it's not good advice. You should be servicing everybody. You should be getting back to everybody. You should be giving everybody the best service that you can. And if you can't handle getting back to everybody, then you should be not taking on more projects, and you should be finishing up what you have on your plate. But it's all the inquiries and all the different stuff. And at the end of the day, people aren't paying what you need to be able to say, like, okay, I could focus on 3 or 4 songs a month. We could have them all done at the end of the month, and I could give everybody a beautiful amount of attention.
Yeah.
But then at the end of the month, you haven't booked the next 4 sessions for the next month, or however many it is that came in. And sometimes somebody comes in at the beginning of the month and they want something to be done within a few weeks, and for them to wait 4 weeks for it and then start something that might take a few weeks, they're not going to wait around for you.
Right.
And in general, I've just been, since opening up here in Israel, I've been just trying to help anybody that wants to make their music, regardless of, if you are making good music or you have a song idea and you have a little bit of a budget, we could do something. It might just be like a one-off session recording your acoustic demo of it, or it might be that we spend a few sessions doing, more built up production. And it might be that we don't necessarily put all that much budget into mixing it necessarily or mastering it, but wherever your budget holds, we can try to do something with it. And because of that, I've got some things that are like, okay, small, lower attention needed, and other things that are very like much more in-depth productions, and the clients every 2 days calling me, what's the story with this? I had this idea. What if we did this? And that's very hard to juggle.
Yeah, it sounds like you need a studio manager, honestly. Like, I don't know.
Well, if anybody hears this and would like to manage for me, that would certainly help. There's a lot of ideas I've had to figure out how to change things around, like having an automated phone service thing where you have like the 4 numbers that you dial versus, calling me, so I could at least differentiate between a personal phone call and a phone call from like a prospective client. I'm sure some of the really, really big people that you've interviewed have found really good ways of getting around this, of having just strange people calling for strange things at all times. And then, hey, can you clean up this vocal recording? It has too much background noise. And then you look into it and it's got a lot of problems with it. It looks like a lot of work. And then they're like, oh yeah, we don't actually have a budget. Well, like, we could have ended this conversation before it started.
Yeah, you got to figure out. It's interesting. Like, I don't know. Like, yeah, it sounds to me like you need help. Like, I also need help. And like, but again, also with budgets, it's hard, but I'm trying to, this is like a year where I'm just trying to delegate more things. And I'm like slowly, like I have somebody else now edit the podcast, which has really cleared up my schedule and helped save me a lot of heartache and stress. And also I'm trying to delegate some like random audio work that I do. Like, I do a lot of random audio podcasts and stuff like that. And it's taking up a lot of my time. So I'm like I'm like losing time for music, and it's like I can't take any more of this unless I'm starting to delegate it. And so I'm just like I'm just trying to think bigger picture now, and I don't know if I'll be successful with it, but like when I don't know, like if I could delegate some things and do the more high priority tasks myself, then I could bring in even more revenue and hopefully pay more people, and like, that bigger picture kind of scaling idea, which, in a very low, not in a big crazy, not a crazy scale, but like a little bit of a scale to kind of hopefully be able to say yes to more people, but also not go crazy and, lose myself in it.
Yeah, 100%. That's the way to go. And that's how the top dogs do it.
Yeah.
I think if you look at like Chris
It's just hard
Lord-Alge. Go ahead, sorry.
No, I was going to say, it's just hard in a small city like where we're like in Jerusalem where we're working. Like it's a very small pool, right? Like when you're in LA, you can really like go hard because it's like the music city and everyone's there and everything's happening there. It's like, it's a little harder to kind of not do a little bit of everything in Jerusalem, so to speak.
Yeah.
But as you work.
That's for sure. Well, I was going to say, like if you look at like Chris Lord-Alge and other really top mixing engineers and producers, they have a team behind them that's, like I haven't been in the studio with Chris Lord-Alge, but I've seen the videos. He's got a guy behind his SSL that's running his Pro Tools rig for him while he's in the front with the gear. Somebody else is patching the things. Somebody else is probably in the back room in the other place, editing everything. So by the time it gets to his desk, there's no noises, there's no issues, there's no bad fades. Everything is done on the back end. I used to do that for somebody in America where he would have a whole album to mix for Killer Mike, and I would take all the sessions and prepare them with his template and edit everything and tune everything and get everything ready to go. So when he came down and sat on it, he didn't have to spend much time, and you don't have to waste that creative space in your mind on all those little background things. I think Manny Marickway probably works similar with his assistant engineer and a lot of really big guys, and that's first of all why they charge what they do too.
Yeah, I think even medium guys and gals are starting to take on assistants and people helping them out, and it's not just the Manny Americans. It's like that bigger rung below them and even below that, because I think people are realizing that like you can't keep up with everything otherwise. Like
it's also a great approach. That's a great way for the
approach.
assistants to learn also and eventually become their own entity.
Yeah, I think I'm realizing that we're starting, like people like in our age-ish, like in mid-30s, we're no longer at the bottom of that ladder rung. We might not be at the top of the ladder, but we're still like a rung above where we used to be. And like it's time to like let other people kind of come up under us and like hopefully raise them up as well, and that can hopefully help us also.
Yeah,
I'm starting to realize that like, oh, like I've been doing this for over a decade. Maybe it's time for me to kind of like not just do everything myself. I don't know. That's kind of been my we'll see how it goes,
You have to evolve and develop, and just like I said at the beginning with Corona and how I had to shift the studio the way it was operating for that in the same perspective of yourself, how you handle the workflow and how do you handle handing out tasks and how you budget your clients accordingly that it makes sense. For me, for example, I'd love to bring in an assistant. I don't necessarily have the financial stability to pay anybody a salary, so it's very difficult. And then at the same time, my whole rating perspective, how my rates work with clients would have to shift. But it's something that when I'm ready to make that transition over, it'll just be a restructuring of, okay, the songs and the services cost differently than what they used to. And this is how I have to do it to be sure that I could say, okay, my buddy over here, the assistant, he's going to tune all the vocals and edit the drums and do everything before the session comes in front of me. So when I come in on Sunday, I'm ready to go 2 hours of mixing and we have something good to go. And then I can move on to the next song and get a lot more done in that way. And then with the current rating scheme that I have now, it definitely doesn't work. And then, it's a scary thing. Everybody has to deal with it. Like, how do you know how to not to overcharge and how do you know not to undercharge?
Right.
And people who do undercharge really affect the market for people like us who do what we do. When somebody down the road in his bedroom is doing something for, $10 an hour, and you're trying to charge $50 an hour or 60 or 70, and then you really have to prove your worth, and that's fine. But people like suddenly get surprised. Like if I've had clients tell like a band who I'm doing regular sound jobs for, they'll tell the client who's booking a concert for them, this is how much the concert costs. And then when it comes to me and I say, well, that's how much this type of concert costs, but this has other things going in, like other things that go into the production cost more money, but the client can't get over it. They heard the price. They heard what it was. They know it's going to cost me X. So why would I want to pay Y when X wasn't appropriate or should have been mentioned in the first place? So other people out there, booking themselves for really cheap or for free really affect how people perceive our services and what we're worth.
Yeah.
Even like if I do like an hourly work for someone where I get like just a singer on a 2-track, we do like 2 vocal tracks on top of this 2-track, and they want to mix it a little bit. It doesn't have to take very long to mix, but I could do it in, let's say, 30 minutes to an hour, whereas somebody who's less experienced might take 2 hours, let's say. For me to charge still that 1 hour, it's almost unfair to me because I've been working over 10 years to be able to do that in half an hour or 15 minutes. Whereas somebody else who would be A being their EQ, A being their, I was just boom, 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 we're done. So is it fair that I only get paid for the 1 hour when I should just get paid a mixing fee, regardless of the fact that it was really easy?
Yeah. Well, I mean, I guess it's in your control to decide to get paid a rate, to come up with perhaps like a fixed rate or something.
Exactly.
For stuff like that.
Well, I've had that for like a fixed rate sheet. If it's vocals to a 2-track, and if it's a multi-track mix, then it's something separate. At the end of the day, I find that I can't really know how much a mix is going to cost and give a fair price without overcharging half the people or undercharging myself other times without seeing how many tracks there are, how bad the recordings are, how good they are. If the sources are great, everything's awesome, and the vibe's already there, sometimes really not a lot of work into it. And if the client already doesn't have a big budget, then I don't feel comfortable, overcharging them as if it's a full-blown thing. And you could also have a 2-track sort of sessions. I've had this before where there's a million vocal tracks. All of them need crazy amounts of tuning and alignment and surgery. And if you give them a price thinking like, oh, it's a 2-track, it's easy, and then suddenly it actually becomes 4 hours of work to be able to get the vibe and things under control in the song. That's why I've been working like that as of late, is just you send me the files and I'll look at it and I will give you a price, including multiple sets of corrections. And you give them a limit so that they know that they can't just keep pounding you forever. Sometimes people send you something to mix and you start it, and then they say, actually, we re-recorded the verse vocals, and you've already mixed the verse vocals. Well, that's additional files. That's not included in the quote I gave, Whereas when you give like a fixed price, okay, it costs $1,500 for a mix or just a random number, you might wind up getting something that has like 3 tracks and really like hurting somebody's ability to do more music. Or you might be right on and earning exactly what you need to earn, or it might still not be enough for the amount of work that sometimes is involved.
Right. It's hard to gauge.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, I've also kind of realized that like, I kind of like look at it as this, of like I have like 2 products that you pay for like a bulk rate, and that'll be like a song production including a mix or just a mix, and that'll just be like a set fee. And then if it's something that's not quite that, then it's going to have to be an hourly rate, because otherwise there's just no way of gauging.
Mm-hmm.
And also some people are comfortable with like what they want. They don't want to say this, but what they want is a demo production. They don't want a full recording production situation where you're putting your heart and soul into it and every last speck of creative juices you could come up with. They don't necessarily want that, but they also don't know how to say that or want to admit that that's what they need. That's like, let's say it's a demo production. And so also like, I know that I would work way too hard on it if I just gave them like a flat rate for something like that. That's going to end up being a demo. Like, I'm not going to be able to not be a perfectionist about it. So it has to be an hourly rate. Otherwise, I'm going to screw both of us over.
Mm-hmm.
But if it's like a full production or it's a full mix, then I'm going to give it my perfectionistic thing, and then it's just going to be the rate. You know what I mean? So like if I'm going to give it my 100%, then it's a rate. If it's like unclear or it's like gray, then we'll do like an hourly thing, because then there's just no other way to like be sure who's getting screwed or not screwed over.
Yeah. Sometimes the artist just wants you to be their like plugin or their mouse and keyboard. Like they want to be the producer. They want the final say. Like no matter what advice you give them or tell them, like, that actually that's not so cool. I had something I just did the other day. At the end of each verse, going into the choruses, there's like a really long pause in the music. And when the guy played the demo with the acoustic guitar, it was like, like building it up or whatever. But it was a very long break, like 5 bars of just, coming out of the verse into the chorus. And I said, well, we could certainly get away with less of it. How much less? That's to taste. And we debated, and I tried once, cutting out a bar and not telling him and seeing if he noticed and things like that. And at the end of the day, he got his way and he got to keep in the space, and I just had to fill it with stuff to make it interesting. But that's an example of you really want to produce yourself. I'm just like, okay, load that plugin on and it makes sound like this. Like I've got maybe a certain sound that I get out of my MIDI type of production stuff that some people want. And so, okay, here's my chords, here's the thing, and I'll give my direction. But they really sometimes just want what they want, and you can't really get around that sometimes.
Yeah, for that kind of stuff, you need to bill hourly. Otherwise,
exactly, that's how I am.
There's just no way to. At that point, you're just an engineer, so it's like, okay,
yeah, whatever.
However long it takes you,
Exactly.
I know how to work fast.
Yeah.
So, ball's in their court at that point.
Yeah, and if they want to take reproduce a whole section, wow, this actually needs this or that, rather than breaking my heart that we have to undo everything that we did. They understand it. It's on their dime. They made the decision. It's their move.
Yeah. Let's talk a bit about mixing, because your mixes sound huge, and especially the drums. Your drums sound just freaking massive.
Thanks.
Love to hear a little bit about your approach to drums these days. How you're approaching mixing, and we could even talk about recording drums, because you actually record drums. I actually just was just comping some drums that you record before we started recording this interview. I was comping some drums that you recorded for me. So.
I hope they sounded okay.
Yeah. Totally.
Yeah, I love drums. First of all, I love recording live drums. I think it's a lot of fun to get to play with mics and different techniques and strategies, and the way different genres and sets and drummers, the way they sound when you have your room mics and you overcompress them and really get a vibe out of people. I enjoy that a lot. There's no straightforward rule to drums. You have to do this or you have to do that. But sometimes if I get MIDI drums that are from Contact or Battery or from a client's sounds or something like that, but I like to make sure that they sound appropriate to the song. You might have found a kick that sounds good on the song, but maybe through EQ and a little bit of compression, it could sit in the mix a little bit more, but also to try to give it some character so it's a little bit more unique from the original sample that came out of the MIDI library. Universal Audio's plugins with the Waves has a lot of good stuff too. Anything that has just gives it a little bit of an analog saturation vibe. Nothing too over the top necessarily, depends on what you're doing. But sometimes on the very beginning of the chain, I'll load some Neve preamp and maybe do slight EQ on it, and maybe an analog compressor just to give it that vibe. We took these MIDI drums out of an MPC or something and ran it through some gear and ran it back into the tape or the computer, and now we have that. So now every move and compression I make down the line, whether it's the bus compression on the drums, which is super important, and the mastering at the end, will pull out that character because it's right there at the very front of the chain. It will start to get that vibe out of it more, just like a little sheen, a little like a filter on Instagram on your picture or something. But nothing too drastic. You load the filter, but you swipe it back a little bit so it's just blended just right. But with drums also, the parallel compression and parallel processing, that gives you a lot of freedom to really make you could have a nice sounding tight drum kit and it could sound good, but then as soon as you parallel compress or put a little parallel distortion or do a kick snare combination thing, or suddenly things start to become alive a little bit more. You could really color it up.
What's your parallel chain? How are you doing parallel compression? Because I know you could blend it in with a mix knob. You could do it on separate channels. I know that there can be some latency and phase alignment issues in the box, depending on how you're doing it. How do you have it set up?
When I started everything, there wasn't always this mix knob that you could turn back on the compressor. On 1176, is a great compressor for parallel, just as a start. Something that usually comes free in a lot of some basic 1176, and I've never done my parallel necessarily on the drum bus in general that way. I usually have a separate aux that I send maybe at Unity the whole signal over to, make that sound slamming. I've been using a lot on my drum parallel compression, just the distressor, because it's just a magical beast of a compressor that could do so much in one unit. It's crazy.
I also do a lot of I use the Slate distressor, but yeah, I use that on drums. That's like my go-to compressor for anything kind of drum related.
Yeah.
Usually, because there's so many options. You got the 4-to-1, you got the 20-to-1, you got the nuke.
It's a blessing because like 15 years ago, you would go into most studios and they'd have like 2 to 4 distressors. I think it'd be really rare if you found more than 4 distressors in a room, sometimes only 1. So you have to really pick, like, what am I going to use that for? There's other great compressors too. There's usually plenty to choose from. But we have this beautiful thing of being able to put distressors on whatever we want or to load, like, cool. Like if I want my kick, my snare, and my bus and my parallel compression to all be distressors, I could. I try to avoid overdoing it with one style thing because then you kind of like get that same character on the sound building up on multiple tracks. Whereas I could color it differently with each thing, and then they make a nice big tie-dye together versus like, oh, everything is blue. But the distressor, you know, it has the nuke mode and it has the sidechain option to ignore the low end and lots of cool options with their little distortion modes. So that sometimes is really great for most parallel things.
So you just run it as like a separate aux, usually into some sort of distressor.
Yeah, and I turn it down all the way in the mix, and then I slowly turn it back up. Like I'm not paying attention to too much how loud it is on that channel itself. Like before the fader, it's like as long as I'm not clipping and distorting, it can be really loud on there. But I'll turn the fader all the way down to 0, and then slowly bring it up to hear where I'm starting to get that spank without clouding everything else too much. And sometimes I've overdone it where I'll totally turn all my parallel compressors a little bit louder than the originals in the mix, and sometimes that's an effect that's cool. But I try to be responsible with it and not make it that the mix is like completely shifted when I turn all my parallels on. I could, like, I've got like 4 or 5 channels of parallel channels throughout the mix for melody, bass, vocals, and the drums. I could group them and turn them on and off and kind of hear that I'm still in the same balance that I am, but I could feel the energy push out of the speakers a little bit harder than I did before. And honestly, sometimes the learning process over the last like year or two is to learn when that's not necessary, because you feel like, oh, I could parallel compress everything, so I have to parallel compress everything, and then you overdo it. Even if it was only a little bit of parallel compression, sometimes you did just a fine job mixing it and making out each sound slamming on its own, that there's really no need to over parallel compress and do that once you throw the master plugin on and squeeze it all out. You get a similar result anyways.
So you kind of mix your drums first and then you decide how much parallel compression to do. It's not
I mix
like you're
everything first. Yeah. I have a whole mix version before parallel usually. I did that song we mentioned before for that guy Aviad. The drums on that, I did right off the bat give some parallel compression because I needed to make sure that the vibe was there already before we kept producing and recording on it. So that was kind of already there, and I probably adjusted it more in the mix process. But right off the bat, that was there. And I don't remember. I might not have parallel compressed anything else, in which case that parallel compression and the drums in that instance is one cohesive sound that kind of like, that's my drum sound. If I need more drums or less drums, they both come up and down together.
You have them grouped. You have like the drum and the drum, you send it through to another aux.
And that, not going through another aux, but if I need to turn them up or down, I would group them together and turn them up or down together.
Got it. Interesting. What's your thought process of like mixing it without the parallel compression and then adding it afterwards, just to get it to 100% before it and then do even beyond 100%? Is that like the thought process?
Yeah, and also when I'm hearing things on parallel happening while I'm EQing and compressing, like on like, let's say it's an acoustic guitar thing and I've got parallel compression open already. That's, completely different than drums. I'm trying to see that I'm not over compressing or under compressing or EQing just right, but I'm also hearing it responding through that parallel compressor that I might not have finished dialing in to be necessarily perfect. So then once I do get to dial it in, then suddenly everything starts to shift, like my interpretation for what I'm hearing. So I'd rather hear from the beginning, from the source. I don't want to hear like, if I've got like a multiband compressor and a compressor on a vocal or a guitar, I don't want to put an EQ on before them and start working from there. I'd put the EQ maybe not after and continue from where I left off. Hear it from the source, like EQ it first, get it nice and clean, then put the compressor, then multiband or whatever. Same concept, but in a more minuscule way of not mixing with your master bus plugins on. You think things are sounding slamming, or right, you turn the master bus plugin off and then everything is flat and vocals are way too loud because they were like digging into the limiters and can't bring everything else down. So I just have a cleaner perspective. If I can make it sound as good as I can on the track when everything blends in, and then from there I say, okay, this I did a good job. This is where I'm at. Now I want to do more. Let me see if I could push it a little harder. That's for me where I come in with the parallel, like, or sometimes the vocal, like, even though the vocal's really good, it still doesn't feel like it just sits. Sometimes after the parallel, like, it really just sits where it needs to.
Wow, it's wild. It's almost like a pre-master or something. It's like
in a way,
an extra lift at the end.
I think some people master like that too, don't they? Where they like they use parallel processing in the master.
I think Miguel does that.
I wouldn't be surprised. Maybe that's where I heard it from.
I'm pretty sure he does that. I don't think most mastering engineers do. I think most mastering engineers don't use parallel compression in the mastering stage, but I could be wrong.
Probably not
a lot
most.
of people I think most mastering engineers that are using like analog chains are just kind of like they're not doing crazy stuff in the box or parallel stuff. They're kind of using their chain and what the tools they know to kind of just enhance the mix.
Mm-hmm.
I think usually that's what's happening, but there's no wrong way to do it, right? Like, and there are people that are doing great job mastering also in the box, and like, you know, whatever.
100%. It's all Jedi stuff, It's all, who knows what they're doing, or it's a hidden secret.
Yeah.
I have I love sending my stuff to Miguel, like I said before. I know when I send something to Miguel, he's mastering it, and that's great. Sometimes when you send to like a mastering house, I always wonder, the mastering house has a specific name that made it popular and famous or whatever. And you send it there, and then they send you the thing back a day or two later. And did that guy really do it, or was it one of his assistants who came in and just like if you're the top label guys or your song has got buzz, are they really giving it a lot of attention? And then if you're just one of the guys that call in and paying the rate, is it just run it through the gear and send it out? I don't know. And that's why I like using an individual, having a relationship versus, but the mastering houses, the advantage is you send them the thing, you get it within a day or two. It's like bing, bang, boom, you have your product. And so you can't have both worlds, when you're dealing with just one person, your friend or your individual, then you send it to them. And if they have time, then obviously they do it. And sometimes Miguel will do something for me immediately. Like I'll be surprised like how fast I'll get it back. And then sometimes, it takes a little bit of time because people have lives and people have bookings, but it's better because you have that relationship. So you get a better product and you know what you're getting versus, not knowing whose hands were on it throughout the process.
Yeah. Something that I'm thinking about now, I'm curious where you're at with it, is like the stereo bus processing. And I've been talking to some people recently who have been telling me that like because of the deliverables that major labels are asking for, you kind of have to have your stems match up as a final mix because of like Atmos and everything that's going on now. And so like stereo bus, you can't really be reliant on stereo bus compression the same way you used to. You kind of have to let everything in the stem level be kind of, that's where that compression is happening. And kind of when you bring it up in the master chain, it's just a bit of like EQ or something. Where you, I spoke with this guy, Tim O'Sullivan. The episode hasn't aired yet, but he was telling me about this, and I kind of felt like almost exposed for like leaning too deeply into my stereo bus processing. And like maybe I need to like do less of that and work it more from the ground up. Like where are you at with that stuff?
I don't mix through anything. I hear without. I definitely don't feel like I'm on that level of expertise. Like if I was really had a great grasp of mastering, then maybe I'd have something I'd run through. And like certainly I have dabbled with like the SSL bus compressor and stuff like that. And like in the recording process, like when you're on a console and recording a band, like that's a lot of fun to have there. It helps add energy. But mixing, I don't leave anything on, but I do at the end of the mix obviously turn on my whole master chain, which has at the top, I use at least lately the last year or two, the Abbey Road's mastering suite. I do a little bit of compress in there, a little bit of tweaking, and then my limiters and EQ after that. And sometimes at the beginning of a production or as I'm going down the line, I might leave a lot of the Abbey Road stuff off because I don't want the client to get too excited just yet. Like if I make it too exciting with that, or then sometimes the next time they hear it, they're like, I don't hear much of it. It's not that much of a dip. But then I know always down the line if I need to give them the extra like, wow. Yeah. There's a few little things you could do on the Abbey Roads thing that quickly enhance it nicely and give you.
You don't want to give away the final mix yet.
Yeah, even if it's not the final mix, like sometimes I'll do that on like a rough mix, and then they'll fall in love with it, and then I can't go back and
Mm-hmm.
change much because they're too in love with it.
Right. Because of demoitis.
Yeah, exactly. So it helps me with the demoitis thing to keep them. And sometimes I just do it. It's not really like a regular thing. It really just depends. But I've never sent anything for Dolby Atmos use yet.
Yeah, me neither.
And I think with that, it might even get not just your mix bus stem, but like my sessions are broken up to like an aux for the drums, an aux for the bass, if there's multiple bass lines, whatever, anything bassy, an aux for all my melodic instruments, which has inside of that other auxes for, if there's stacked acoustic guitars or strings or whatever, lots of different groups. And then my vocals on the bottom. So let's say my melody bus, sometimes I do glue all of the instruments together with a little bit of compression on the melody bus. So sending stems to Dolby, I guess the only way to do that and maintain that whatever vibe that processing added would be to actually not just commit to the tracks and export them, but to like mute everything besides the track you need and bounce it through the chain that you've run it through.
Yeah.
Otherwise, things start to change. I've had that for certain productions now that are going to be performed in concerts, and they're building Ableton sets based on the instrumentals that I bring them. I have to give them individual tracks, and I have to make the decision like, we have this Santoor thing that's like really 8 tracks on its own, each idea, but then it's broken down to like, okay, 2 stereo tracks of like a modern interpretation of what a Santoor would sound like versus a classical version of what a classical Santoor player would play on the song. So rather than give them each individual stems, I had to give them those auxes. But then if they don't need every element in it, so I give them a separate folder of everything broken down on their individual tracks. But then that's missing the processing on the group. So it's hard to decide, and you don't know necessarily what they're going to need when they get to rehearsals and start putting it all together.
Right, you don't know what's going to be needed down the line. It's confusing.
Yeah, so I have to spend a lot of time giving them more than what they probably need and be really detailed and organized, because that's what I want when people send me stuff, is for it to be really organized and detailed.
Yeah. You might need to get some sort of like Bounce Butler or Bounce Factory or something to help you out with these things.
Yeah, that's something, again, I'm not great at, is finding, like, developing with these new technologies that come out, like, oh, this thing will automate that process for you. Like, I still don't know if I trust it. I know that I'll do it right, and I don't necessarily have all the hours to learn how these things work and to experiment and have things go funny. But it's also not that regular that I have to send out huge show tracks like that for Ableton mixes. It's like most times a basic show track works.
Yeah. Same here. Hopefully when bigger clients start to come through the door, that'll be when more of like the bouncing of stems is going to take place for me. And then I might have to get some extra help in automation and that. But I'm not there yet.
Well, that's where your assistant will come in handy.
Maybe, yeah, if that happens. All in time, hopefully.
Yeah.
Amazing. Well, John, your mixes are sounding awesome. Let's have a listen to what we're talking about in the Sauce segment. You sent me a track called "Closer to You" by Levite. I think I'm pronouncing it correctly.
I don't know. It's
you don't know.
Her name is Hannah, and the Levite thing I didn't know anything about that being her stage name or anything like that until the song came out. She's a new artist. I think this might be one of her very first releases ever. So we're still learning about who she is and what she's planning on doing.
Yeah, totally. So let's have a listen to that for about 90 seconds and we'll chat about it. Sound cool?
Cool.
Yeah.
Yeah, John. Well, it sounds amazing. I love the vocals, like the harmonies, and the lead vocal also, obviously, and just like the ambience of it all is great.
Thank you. Yeah, she did a great job of sitting on. We recorded the lead vocal, and she went home and sat on harmony ideas and really came to the table. And then it was just a matter of guiding her with how many stacks, where, what, and helping her see the vision through. On that song, it was the drummer Asaf Kraus and my good friend from America, David Schroeder, playing the upright bass, and Zvi Portnoy playing guitar. So it felt like a real dream team of studio musicians. So my role was really just as a producer, coordinating the emotions of the song so that it stayed minimalist but kept full and felt lush. And
yeah.
I think
That totally comes across, by the way. The
yeah?
minimal but lush and full. Yeah,
good.
Totally.
Thank God.
That's exactly the vibe. Yeah.
I enjoy the style of music in general. It's like relaxing. It's peaceful. It's versus something that could be the exact opposite. Could also be fun, but it's not necessarily easy to listen to when you're hanging out and just relaxing.
Yeah.
But specifically on this song, some interesting things in the production side. Asaf Kraus, who played the drums, we did a take without any cymbals, with him playing with his hands on the drum set as opposed to sticks, like smacking it with his fingertips kind of thing. He has this way of doing it. It's almost like playing bongos, but on the regular drums. And then at the same time overlapping on top of that, I believe we used mallet, for the cymbal swells, and just like having like a top take of the top action that's happening on the set, and then a bottom take of like the kick and the snare, the toms. The snare, obviously,
The shells, yeah.
The snare is pulled down, I think, for most of it. I don't remember if we pulled them back up for any part, maybe near the end when the snare really hits in, we pop the snares back on. I think that adds to part of the emotion. It's not just, like hitting a drum set, but really like feeling a drum set with your hands. I think that was a big part of it. And again, guiding the emotions and the vibe of the song. I felt like my biggest like source of pride out of the song was coming out of the bridge into the outro, where if the music kind of reaches a climax and then like opens up into like much more openness. And each musician who's kind of playing the song, it's a pretty, like, the chords are simple. It's not like too much going on, but you could get really lost in it and miss, your outro, when to stop digging in and when to like let it breathe. And so for each different take, I had to be really clear with that vision, that from the drums on just a scratch guitar, that we got that cymbal, that, and then to know like we gave it like a bar of rest, and then he comes back in after that breath with more quieter, more sparse thing, and then to pass that along to the bassist when I sent off for him to play along, that's a spot where it needs to boom, like it needs to breathe there in that one moment. And the same thing when Surly was here in the studio and we were doing the guitar parts, to be able to guide him on every stack and every layer of what was going on there, that's where that needs to happen. So you build, not just that like you stop at the right spot, but that you build up to it in just the right way, that it really, you feel that release. And with live musicians, it can be complicated to stay on top of all that. When you're producing with MIDI, you could just, mute what you need to mute and rearrange to make that feel okay. But this, you have to know ahead of time that's
right. But you also get that benefit of having organic instruments. Like there's, if you're building up with a real instrument, you could really do a subtle thing that it's really hard to do with MIDI. Like how hard you're digging in, and like there's just something about real music, human musicianship that kind of can really build that emotion that something you can program doesn't build the same way. Maybe it works for like trance music or whatever, but like for this kind of, organic lush thing, it really is nothing like the real thing,
Yeah.
And the emotion really comes across, which is great. I mean, also in the lead vocal has so much emotion.
That's great. Yeah.
Like it's like you could tell she means what she's singing.
For sure. I really enjoyed working on that song. And, like you said, with the MIDI dynamics, if you want your MIDI to sound real, then pay attention to your dynamics. Like if you're programming a hi-hat part, there's so much more swing and groove you could put in by just lowering certain hits and raising other hits. You could shift instead of just like it's just it's mind-blowing. So like you said, with a human musician, they naturally do that. So you just need to guide them into doing that in the right spots. But I know some people who program MIDI, and if you have the time and the patience and you understand your dynamics, you can make a lot of really realistic sounding things. It's, again, just a budget thing. For me, when I have a client and they want a part done, like, hey, I'd like this horn section played on this song. And I say, that's great. Well, for me to program it, it could take me like forever, like many hours to make it sound real and program it and get all the, like, basically the envelope, the sound envelope of a horn is very difficult to emulate in the MIDI world. So I could do that maybe over 4 hours for like a 16-bar loop or something. We could figure out something. Or we could spend an hour or two with a real horn player and just record it, and it'll cost the same or whatever, and you have a better result.
Yeah. You're not afraid to use session musicians and reach out and
for sure
collaborate.
If something needs to feel real, even if, like, I play guitar, but I'm not an amazing guitar player, so most of the stuff that I could do for clients that I could play myself will do. But sometimes I'll be like, it really just needs something that's more like this. I'm like, oh, that's great. Well, that could take me like 8 hours to learn how to play, and then I could record in about an hour. So let me just bring in a guitarist who could do it in an hour.
Totally. I think a lot of what I bring to the table with my productions is because I'm like a good enough bass player, guitarist, and piano player that I could do most of the things. But then sometimes you just need that right musician to do it. Like, you just really need a better piano player than me, or you really need an amazing guitar player. So, like, I also try to bring in when I can, when the budget also allows for it, and it just depends.
Yeah,
but it's amazing. And in terms of like the mix of that song, how did you treat the upright bass and get it to like sit nicely with the drums, if you remember?
I treated it real nice. That's what I did.
Yeah.
Upright bass is really difficult. It's not something that I do all the time. It's not like always crossing my plate. Like, I'm sure if you're a bluegrass mix engineer, you probably know exactly what to do to your upright bass. I don't necessarily know, and I don't necessarily remember, but I think it did involve multi-band compression and dynamic EQ to be able to tame. You still want a full low end, but you don't want to feel like super subby from an upright bass. It's supposed to feel natural, and you still want to be able to keep some of that, the intimacy of finger notes and the feel of fingers on the fretboard. So really just about controlling the subs and nurturing the low mids in just the right way, and probably a lot of EQing and cutting tight notches out of certain frequencies that bother, or and same thing with the dynamic EQ. And then from there, just vibe compression and keeping it in one, not necessarily one spot. Like, it obviously can have ups and downs, but to keep the dynamics under control, because you don't need it hopping up above other things too much. It could sit right where it needs to.
Well, it sounds great, man. The track is excellent, and the emotion comes across. So, congrats.
Thank you.
Yeah. Since I have you on the air, and you've actually mixed my bass playing, and I was really impressed with what you did with it, because I find that it's hard for me to kind of give the bass the bottom. Like, I find the bass usually works better when you give it the bass as opposed to the sub, and like you give the kick, like, let's say the 60 to 50 hertz area. And I think the track that you did, you like made my bass work so nicely with like the sub in like it was almost like a pop rap song or something.
Was that for one of my French clients that you're talking?
Yeah, one of your French clients.
Yeah,
exactly.
I think also, like, I have this constant doubt in my mind if what needs to be in the sub area, like if it should really be the kick or if it should really be the bass. I think it's also genre specific.
Yes. Mm-hmm.
And like maybe both are the right answers, and it's just a matter of how you sidechain one against the other, so that when the kick happens, maybe the sub scoops out with a dynamic EQ, or with just a regular sidechain compressor on the bass, so that the kick always is able to poke in.
Yeah.
And it's just like with the bass, with my perspective with everything with mixing is you got to fit everything out of your speakers. So the more stuff you have, the more EQing you're probably going to have to do to squeeze it all out there to get the whole frequency range out. So with the bass especially, I think, we want more bass. We want it to feel bigger. So we're always turning it up and making it bigger and boosting the bass, but that might be the opposite of what we need, versus like to cut out every bit of bad frequencies that I could get away with cutting without altering the sound of the bass, and then from there compressing it a little bit, and then maybe cutting out some more frequencies that bother me, and then compressing a little bit. So I'm constantly like pushing up.
You're heavy-handed.
Heavy-handed, but with a light hand, because I'm not doing huge drastic cuts, but I'm doing a lot
of massaging.
Yeah, exactly. And then at the end, with just the right amount of compression and just pulling out just the right pleasant frequencies that I want to be there, to have them being amplified by that compressor, you get a much more under control, and just like the foundation of a house, it's just there, cement holding things in place.
Do you remember if you sidechained the bass in that particular track that I'm talking about?
I probably did. On most occasions, I do to some extent, even if it's just a hair. I think it was My Blues was the song. Is that the one?
I think so. That might have been it. Yeah. Yeah, maybe we'll put a link to that so people can hear your mix of my bass in the show notes.
For sure.
We'll find it afterwards. You did a great job on that as well. I wanted to ask you also on a personal level, like, because we're both, whatever, we know each other very well. And you're also using the Focal Shape Twins. How has that transition gone for you? How are they working out for you?
I thought initially when I got them that I would resell them for profit because of how I came into, not that they're stolen or anything. A producer friend of ours, Mendy Portnoy, moved back to America, had to sell them off. Bought them for a really good price from him.
Moved back. He's from England. He didn't move back to America.
Not back to. Oh yeah, it's true. Back. Yeah, it's for me. It's all the same thing. It's outside of like where I could go. I'm like stuck here right now. I can't go anywhere if I want to go. But so Mendy moved to America, and he sold me his Focals for the American price, new. And in Israel, because of the way things work here, it's extraordinarily more expensive. So I thought I'd just sell them for a profit, or like if I didn't like them, I'd sell them for a profit. But now I'm completely addicted to them. I use my NS10s much, much less than I used to. I think I used them yesterday for a little bit, and before that, it had been a few weeks since the last time I referenced something on them. It's something about the Focals' clarity and the stereo image lets me hear my effects processes, like my reverbs and delays. And if I were to like use the Haas effect and like delay one side of my delay, I really feel the clarity in all that much more. The NS10s, you don't get any of that same detail, so you could still check, okay, does the mix sound good overall or bad overall? But I'm not getting all that little details. It's almost like I'm wearing headphones when I'm in front of them. Like you could hear those subtleties. And it's just been translating really well. Once I got more or less an idea of the low end, which I still think I'm struggling with, especially depending on if I go to the back of my room. There's a lot of bass in my studio in the back of the room, which makes you have your doubts. I always have a doubt in my mind of if it's too much or too little, but things seems to be translating really nicely off of them to everything else. So I think I'll stick with them for the next 20 years or so.
Amazing. 20 years. All right.
Yeah.
That's awesome. Yeah, I'm loving them also. They're just exactly the same thing. Like the image is amazing, and also they just translate so well. Like what I was on before, I'm like almost ashamed to admit that I was on HS80s for so long, but I was. There was something in the mid-range that would not translate, and I think it's because of the crossover point or whatever, and their dual drivers and things that I know less about than other people. But as soon as I moved to this, like the mid-range translation was just like instant, and the low end is also just translate. Everything is translating. It's crazy.
Yeah, it's great. It's a powerful thing to have that tool pop into your life. I was using the HS80s for a long time also, for like 10 years. Not the HS80s, HS50s with a sub. That was my thing for like 10 years until these Focals. And
Right.
I feel your pain. I still have my HS50s here in storage just in case, because at the end of the day, if you know your monitors really well, you could still get her done. But I'm happy that I've stepped up to a better situation with these ones.
No, I'm happy for you too, man. So, as we draw the interview towards the close, I always like to ask guests, kind of more general questions about, inspiration and stuff like that. So do you have, there are days where we're obviously hyped to get in the studio, but there's other days where we're a little bit less hyped. Do you have any routines, habits, anything you do to kind of stay motivated to do the work you're doing?
I think that the motivation comes from having like a really good project or a really good song or something. Just have like, one here or there that's like really exciting, and hopefully you have a lot more than just one here or there. But if I do one cool project, then that gives me spirit and strength to press on and do some more. And if you have like one moment of success with something, one song that does well, then maybe that gives you just enough to put another 6 months in and try to see if you can put yourself through more. Like in a day-to-day routine, I come into the studio and I make coffee. Sometimes I'll watch like a little YouTube video or two. Like a lot of major recording facilities, you'll see the TVs above the consoles always going. Like sometimes it's a part of it where you have to like lean back, look at something else, take your mind off of it for a second, come into it focused and fresh, and all right, we're digging in an hour, and then we're gonna pull our head back out for like 10 minutes. watch 10 minutes of a TV show, have a cup of tea, and then dig back in for another hour.
Yeah.
If you don't give yourself breaks, like sometimes when I'm doing like just studio bookings outside of production where I have like 4 sessions throughout a day, 2 hours with one people and like a 10-minute break between the next two hours for another set, and then another 3 hours for another set, and another 2 hours with 10 minutes in between, that's barely enough for you to like keep your sanity and your focus to be able to do it for all that long. And I think, when it comes to rates and how you charge people, that's something to keep in mind too. Like an 8-hour day sitting in mixing is not the same as an 8-hour day in the office where you're inputting data or negotiating or talking to people. It's you have to be focused, and your ears are they get tired, and you have to take care of them. So it's important to, if you're taking care of that and you're giving yourself enough breaks, then it makes it a little bit more bearable to come back in and do the things that you don't necessarily want to be doing, like sitting for 2 hours tuning vocals by hand.
Totally. Yeah. So I spoke with this guy, Ed Boyer, who has worked on a lot of like the big a cappella records. And he kind of told it to me like this, and I resonated with it. He's like, I'm either really excited to do the work or to get it over with. It's like either getting to it or getting done with it. So I totally feel that.
Yeah.
Yeah. There's definitely a lot of tasks. It's not all glamorous, but those songs can really keep that inspiration going. Totally. I definitely asked you this the first time we chatted, but just looking back on your journey, was there something that, and I'm kind of rebranding it as phrasing it towards somebody who's coming up now, advice for the kids getting started today. Was there something that you did or didn't do on your journey that you'd want to impart as like a lesson of like, hey, keep at that or don't do that. That'll hold people back. What would be that one piece of advice you'd give to somebody?
It's a great question. Overall, one thing I'm glad I did is I took the time to do a free internship. Obviously, it would be better if it was paid because then you'd have money to show for it. But through the unpaid internship, I was able to sit in and learn from a lot of really fantastic producers and engineers and people, and to see real life situations that you can't learn in school or on a YouTube video. So I'm glad I got to be there to see what it's like when, Apple Music comes in to do with a Hollywood video team to record B.O.B., play a live concert in Studio A, and what goes into that the day before the setup and the expectations. At the same time to see, how to interact with the client and how to keep a studio clean. I think for me, just having that background from my internship of knowing how a studio's facility is supposed to feel when you walk in, I try to keep my personal studio in the same condition as much as I can, so that clients come in, they say, first thing they say is, wow, it's clean in here. Wow, it smells nice. Wow, everything is put away. You see other studios or producers, their desk is full of coffee, cups, and trash, and notes from last week's session. Things like that. Those little details give people the trust to say, wow, if you're that meticulous about your space and your vibe, then your sessions are going to be organized and your music is going to be well thought out. And that's for sure one thing I'm grateful I did that set me off from that internship to be able to continue developing and learning and growing to be able to do this for a living, which I'm grateful for and very blessed for.
Yeah.
Things that I would regret that I did.
You don't have to answer that if you don't want to.
No, it's an interesting question because there's a lot of regrets, but I'd say I regret that I don't have a stronger grasp of music business and tracking down my publishing rights with certain songs that I've worked on, and to be able to keep track of the financial and the business side of it. At the end of the day, I got into this because I wanted to make music, and I enjoy the technical side of it too. I enjoy the music, and I feel like my ears have something to be able to give people. But at the same time, I'm not a businessman, and I'm not necessarily, maybe I've, from my family, entrepreneurial blood in me, but I don't consider myself an entrepreneur or like a startup kind of person who wants to manage my own business for the rest of my life or anything like that. But that's just how things fell out. So if I had a stronger, at the same time, I've learned a lot over the years. I think I've gotten pretty okay at it. But to have like at the very beginning to have focused more on a music business course and really understanding the back end. At the time you think, well, I'll worry about it when I get there. Like when I'm doing a big song with a big thing and there's a contract or whatever, like I'll figure it out as I get there, because you're still small time. You're thinking that. But then once you do get to the big time, you don't necessarily have the time to learn all of that stuff except through mistakes or the hard way.
Yeah.
So
Mm-hmm.
if you want to profit off of your music, then you have to accept that 50% is going to be the business end. Like really 100% of it's making good music, but you have to add another 50% on that 100% to really get the business side down.
Right. On the other end, maybe you got the music side down faster by focusing on that, and now maybe bring in some more business know-how. And
yeah, it could be.
now that your production skills are at whatever level they're at now, that they weren't at the beginning, now is a good time, as good as ever to get the business stuff up to snuff.
Yeah, that's what I'm working on now. You got to learn how to manage. That's at the end of the day.
It's hard to put so much emphasis on business when we got into it for the music, because we love the music, and it's a hard reality. It's like the same thing as social media. It's like, why are we spending so much time on these platforms that are just draining our attention and our souls? But like, it's also important. It's just a hard balance that we kind of day by day are still learning, to kind of manage all the other things surrounding what we love to do so that we can keep doing what we love to do. And it's it's a struggle for me, and I think for most people in the business. So just keep at it, I guess, so to speak.
I stay off the
Well,
social
John,
media as much as possible. That's how you take care of that. There was a high season, for when you had an opportunity to promote yourself on Facebook and Instagram and make a lot of money and bring in a lot of stuff. But I think just like, hip hop music today is saturated with lots of people trying to break in. The whole social media platforms is all just more advertisements and people shoving stuff down your throat. So like, is anybody really wanting to consume your promotion on those platforms anymore, or do you need to promote in a different way, or find a way to make your stuff digestible? So like, just stay off of it. Keep your ears open to the next new big thing where that's where you'd promote yourself. When like TikTok was huge for promoting people, it still is, but like at the beginning of it, that was when you really had your chance to make a huge
to make an impact.
Yeah, now it's like who cares?
That door's already been closed.
Yeah.
I think what's cool about Instagram as opposed to like Facebook, I think Facebook is basically dead, except for personal, people that you're actually friends with and personal things. But like with Instagram, what's cool for me with Instagram is I'm able to actually connect with other people that do what we do. And I find it very easy to reach out to guests, let's say for the podcast, or to connect with people that like my podcast can like reach out to me on Instagram. And I feel like, I don't know if it's like a community. It's not quite enough to be a community, but the access to people on Instagram is really phenomenal. And that ability to kind of just be like, hey, like by seeing stories of people that have been on the podcast, I know what they're up to, and then I could reach out and be like, hey, that was awesome, that's great, and just keep up that relationship. And it's a great way to kind of just keep that connection going. So I think Instagram, even though it's like for promotional purposes, maybe it's dead, but on an interpersonal kind of relationship level, I think it's still alive.
Oh, for sure.
If that makes sense. Which is also important because it's a relationship business. And again, like I don't know what the right amount is, because maybe you're right. Maybe just staying off of it altogether is better, because it does suck you in, and then you're there spending hours doing things you shouldn't be doing. You could spend that time, getting better at organizing, or better at mixing, because you're just mixing more music or something. You know what I mean? It's I guess like the pursuit of what to do with your time is an existential crisis always.
Yeah,
that's something I struggle with, because we all know that time is limited. So
you gotta have the yin and the yang, the zen and the enough to know what you're there doing it for, because you're exactly right. Like you still have to keep interactions with people. I've been wanting to delete my Facebook for years now, and I just can't, because still there is the need to be able to reach out to someone if you need to, and that's just the only avenues of doing that these days is social media. But at the same time, my negative outlook comes from, when I open up my Instagram, I'll see like, okay, 4 new messages. Let me go see who these are. This guy wants me to pay the money to promote my page. This guy wants me to pay the money to promote my website. This guy wants me to redo my graphic design logo. Like, that's great, but I don't know who any of these people are. If it's like a outsourced graphic design company in India that's mass bulk messaging everybody, so I think like what is still powerful with Instagram is you are following a certain person, you have that interaction with them, so you could still see just the people who are related to you in that way. Whereas other platforms, maybe it's like just a lot of other stuff happening, and you can't necessarily go in for a second and focus on what's going on with Ben and his story and Secret Sonics and see what's going on.
Yeah, I don't know. Yeah, like you kind of talked about, like the yin and the yang. You kind of have to figure out the right balance. The problem is that the platforms draw you in anyways because they're just seeking your attention, and it's rough, man. It's a rough world, but I guess this is what we have, so we have to deal with it. You know?
Yeah, 100%.
John, this has been so great to catch up with you, and I hope to catch up with you again soon in person, off the air. Yeah, it's good to see your face, man.
Good to see you too, man. I appreciate it. It's been too long. Hopefully we'll be back in another 3 years with some more information. We'll
Maybe
see
less.
where we're all at.
Yeah, hopefully less. Yeah, something like that. Amazing. Well, John, always great to catch up with you, and I love what you're doing. And what resonates with me about the work you're doing is that you really just have the artists back, and you're just trying to do the best service you can. And I think that's what it's about, the relationship and the service. And you're crushing it, dude. So keep it up.
Thank you, Ben. Thanks for having me again.
Thank you so much for listening to this episode of Secret Sonics. I hope you enjoyed this conversation as much as I did. If you've been digging the show, it would be awesome if you could share this episode or your favorite episode with a friend or two, and or leave a rating and review on Apple Podcasts, Spotify, or your podcatcher of choice. That's it for now. Have a great week. Take care and dig in. See you soon. Bye-bye.